Assalamu alaikum everyone, this is Ayman Nazir and welcome to Knowledge Realm. So students, we are studying international relations and the topic that we're going to cover today is second great debate of IR, that is traditional approach versus behavioral approach. Students, this is a very important topic and a little complex. So I'll try to make it easy and simple for all of you. So let's get started. Before going to the topic directly, first I think that we should recall all the history and we should create a base. Those who watch my lectures, they know that first I create a base and review everything that we have studied in the previous lectures. So students, we know that in the ancient times there was a rule of classical realism. Scholars presented this view. They did not name this theory at that time. They just gave some assumptions like Thucydides, Niccolo Machiavelli, Thomas Hobbes. They just gave their assumption of human nature, that human nature is selfish, there is something wrong with human nature, human are driven by diffidence, glory and greed and all these kind of things. So this was the view that people in 400 BC held. Then students in 16th century, 17th century, there was the era of enlightenment and world witnessed the birth of liberalism. Scholars like John Locke, they presented this concept of liberalism and they rejected this theory of classical realism and they asserted that no, there is nothing wrong with the human nature. Human nature is altruistic, human nature is good, and main problem is with the unrepresentative rulers of the world. These people wage war and the local people, they are good. The nations, all the nations consist of people and those people are good and their nature is altruistic and not selfish. So this was the birth of liberalism. Then students, in 20th century, early 20th century, in 1914, world witnessed the World War I. That was the most horrible war at that time. That was the time when nations had some expansionary desires. Germany wanted to expand, Austria-Hungary wanted to expand, Serbia wanted to expand, and then Germany attacked on France and then Russia got into the war. So all these European powers, they had expansionary desires. They were building up their military and there were alliances and balance of power concept, all these things. They plunged the entire world into World War I. So at that time, people witnessed a revival of classical realism. People realized that classical realism prevails in political fabric of states. Anyways, nations fought World War I and then in 1918, World War I ended and world leaders presented a new view that was called idealism. Idealism was presented by Woodrow Wilson. He was main proponent of idealism. He gave his 14 points and why idealism was presented. Well, the main aim behind this theory was to eradicate the menace of world from war. Scholars like Woodrow Wilson, they believed that war is evil. War brings nothing but misery, destruction, and death of young people, young soldiers. So we should eradicate this menace from the world. We should eliminate war and we should make peace and we should live together and there should be a concept of collective security and collective peace, and these kinds of concepts were promoted at the time by Woodrow Wilson. So they gave idealism and they established League of Nations. League of Nations was formed on January 10, 1920. So this was the view of scholars like Woodrow Wilson at that time in 1918, and they just made an effort to eliminate war from the world. Then students, in 1939, world witnessed very interesting turn of events. Idealism presented by Woodrow Wilson failed and Germany waged Second World War, and it was an even deadlier war. I cannot recall exactly, but I think in World War I, 10 million or 15 million people died, but in World War II, almost 50 million people died, and Germany waged this war. So what happened? What happened to idealism? Well, idealism failed. League of Nations was dissolved on April 19, 1946. League of Nations could not prevent this even bigger war, and idealism could not eliminate this menace of war from the world. So idealism failed. Then students, world witnessed revival of classical realism. Classical realists, the scholars of classical realism, once again came to the front, and they started berating idealist scholars. They started their debate. That was the first great debate of IR. I have made a lecture on this topic also. If you want to learn first great debate of IR, go to my channel and playlist International Relations Part 1. So realist scholars started a debate, and they started berating idealist scholars that what are you doing? You are just idealizing things. You are not trying to understand the harsh realities of the world. You are just making assumptions. You are just idealizing things that okay, human nature is altruistic and we will establish this League of Nations, and these things will prevent war from in the world, and these things will eliminate war. You're not trying to understand the real scenario. You're not studying nationalism. You're not studying what drives the behavior of human. You just idealize. So this was the first great debate, and I have discussed this in detail in the previous lecture. Then students, in 1950s, another debate started, and this is known as second great debate of IR. Students, in 1950s, world saw scientific revolution, and that scientific revolution led to the initiation of this great debate, second great debate. It was a debate between two approaches, that is behavioral approach and traditional approach. Remember, it was not a debate between two theories. Rather, it was a debate between two approaches, behavioral approach and traditional approach. So let's study in detail what this great debate was about. So students, we all know that theorists always need some kind of material to build a theory on. For example, if you have science background, if you have studied some science in your matriculation or inter, you can definitely make sense that scientists always performed experiments, and on the results of those experiments they built their theory. For example, we all know theory of biogenesis and abiogenesis. Aristotle was of the view that life originates from non-life things. This was the view of Aristotle, and he performed some experiments, and on the basis of the results of those experiments he gave this theory of abiogenesis, that life originates from non-life. So this was the view of Aristotle, and he built his theory on the basis of his results of his experiments. Similarly, social scientists also need some material to build a theory on, and in case of realism or liberalism, this material was taken from history. For example, Hans Morgenthau's view was based on Thucydides' view of human nature and Niccolo Machiavelli, and they all built their theories on the basis of the material provided by the scholars who lived in ancient times. Then John Mearsheimer, we all know that John Mearsheimer is a very, very famous realist scholar. He also built his theory on Thomas Hobbes' view of human nature and state of nature. So all kind of theorists, they need some material to build a theory on, and this is the main point of second great debate. This was the main bone of contention between the traditionalist and behavioralist, that the material that you're building your theory on should be authentic. This was the main conflict between the two sides. Okay, students, traditional approach was actually taking its material from historical knowledge. The two most dominant theories of IR, that is classical realism and classical liberalism, are based on traditional approach, and this approach actually took all its material from historical knowledge, that is from the scholars who lived in ancient times like Niccolo Machiavelli, Thucydides, all the realist scholars like Hans Morgenthau, E.H. Carr, and John Mearsheimer. All these scholars took material from history and they built their theory on. Hans Morgenthau's view was actually based on Niccolo Machiavelli and Thucydides' view. Hans Morgenthau said that universal moral principles cannot be applied on states. And if you have studied the Niccolo Machiavelli, if you have not, you can definitely go to my channel and watch a lecture on realism there. You will be able to make good understanding of Niccolo Machiavelli. What Niccolo Machiavelli presented, he also asserted that a prince cannot follow conventional religious morality. Prince has many responsibilities, so he should not follow these moral principles. And Hans Morgenthau also, he based his theory on this view of Niccolo Machiavelli, that universal moral principles, these principles are not for a prince. Alright, so Hans Morgenthau also said that universal moral principles cannot be applied on states. A state has to fulfill its responsibility. This was exact same view that Niccolo Machiavelli held. So Hans Morgenthau, who is a realist, he took his material from history, historical knowledge, and he built his theory of realism on that historical knowledge. So he used traditional approach. This was the traditional approach. Similarly, John Mearsheimer, who is a realist scholar, his view resembled Thomas Hobbes' view of the world. John Mearsheimer says that in the anarchic world of international politics, it is better to be Godzilla than Bambi. He says that we are living in a world where anarchy rules. We are living in a state of war of all against all. This is exactly the view of Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes also opined that people are living in a state of war of all against all. Everyone is threatened by everyone. Okay, this was the view of Thomas Hobbes, and John Mearsheimer built his theory on the view of Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes lived in, I cannot remember exactly, in 15th century, I guess. He wrote his book Leviathan, and he was also one of those who presented social contract theory. So students, this was the main traditional approach that realist scholars used to build their theory on. They used knowledge from history. They used the knowledge given by the historical scholars like Thucydides, Niccolo Machiavelli, and Thomas Hobbes. They did not perform any experiments like science. They just built their theory on historical knowledge. Similarly, students, liberalism presented by Woodrow Wilson in 20th century was also based on historical knowledge, the knowledge given by people who lived in ancient times. Liberalism was based on the liberal approach of Enlightenment era. Students, what did liberalism of John Locke opine? It simply believed in the altruistic nature of human. John Locke said that there is nothing wrong with human nature. Human nature is altruistic and is in perfect state of nature. The problem is unrepresentative rulers of nations. These rulers wage war to maximize their own power. These rulers plunge their nation into war. I mean, if we ask the people, they would never ever agree to wage war against anyone. People are altruistic. They do not like war. Unrepresentative rulers, they wage war. This is the main problem, and this was the view of John Locke. Now, Woodrow Wilson, he based his theory of idealism on this view. He took material, he took knowledge from history, and he based his theory on this view. Then, students, John Locke presented a solution, a way to eradicate the menace of war from the world. He said that there should be consent of the governed. There should be a social contract between government and the governed. I mean, if people agree for a ruler to govern them, then the government should govern them. This was the social contract. Now, if we study the concept of Woodrow Wilson, we would realize that Woodrow Wilson actually gave the exact same solution to eradicate the menace of war from the world. What did he present? Democratic peace theory. He said that there should be democracy, people should choose their rulers, and if the ruler fails to fulfill its responsibility to protect the people and to promote peace in the world, the people have the right, people reserve right to overthrow that ruler. Now, both the leaders, John Locke and Woodrow Wilson, they gave exact same solution. John Locke used this term social contract, that there should be a social contract between rulers and the governed, the people, and Woodrow Wilson, he used this democratic peace theory. He used this phrase, democratic peace theory. So, where did this knowledge come from? This knowledge actually came from history. Woodrow Wilson based his theory on historical knowledge. So this was actually the traditional approach of IR, taking the material to build theory on from historical knowledge. Classical realist and classical these idealists, all the proponents of these theories were doing this. They used traditional approach to build their theory. Students, in 20th century, the world witnessed very interesting turn of events. It was the time when people witnessed scientific revolution. I mean, science was praised in the world, and science started taking control of the world. In 1950s and 1960s, we all know that there was this scientific revolution. People started inventing new things, new technologies, everything new, and the faith of people in science increased manifold. It was the rise of science in the world. But students, this revolution posed a threat to political science. How? Students, scholars of political science started discussing that today people have started believing in science, in concrete evidences, in facts and figures, but our theories are based on traditional approach. Our theories are based on historical knowledge that is not proved and that cannot be proved with the help of science. So there is a threat that people will start losing their faith in our theories like classical realism and liberalism. I mean, on what assumptions these theories are based on? Simply human nature is selfish, human nature is altruistic, and people believe in glory, people believe in greed. What is this? They presented these theories based on these assumptions only. There were no concrete evidences, there were no comprehensive studies or established facts. So scholars of political science started discussing that people will eventually stop believing in our theories because our theories are not concrete. Our theories are not based on some concrete evidences. And today is the era of science. So we should not use traditional approach anymore. This was the main claim. This was the main problem of proponents of scientific revolution. These proponents were Bull-Kaplan and James Rosenau and Steve Shawn. These were the main proponents of scientific revolution, and they suggested that IR theories should be based on scientific methods and not the traditional approach. They suggested that the IR scholars should stop using traditional approach to build their theory on because traditional approach does not give a very concrete foundation. What is traditional approach? Just taking material from history and building your theory on. They said that if we continue to do this, people will stop believing in our theories. They came up with a solution, and they said that there should be some scientific models, there should be some statistical models, data and facts to increase the validity of our theories. This was their main solution to the problem. I mean, they said that people will stop believing in our theories because our theories are based on this all the historical knowledge. I mean, if I say that 2 plus 2 is equals to 4, everyone would believe me. No one can doubt this. If I say that carbon emissions are causing global warming, everyone would believe this because today we have concrete evidences on this, and this is a established fact. If I say that sea level is rising, everyone would believe, because there are researches on this, and international intergovernmental panel on climate change have researched on this, and there are concrete evidences, facts on this, figures on this. Everyone would believe this, right? So this is science. Everyone believes in science. But if I say that human nature is selfish, some would believe, some would not believe. So this was the main problem of the scholars of scientific revolution. They say that we should stop using this approach, this traditional approach. We should use some scientific models, some statistical models, data and facts to increase the validity of our theories. This was the scientific revolution. I hope that now it makes sense. I tried my best to explain this, and I hope that now all of you, those who are listening, can definitely make sense of what I'm saying. So students, this was the scientific revolution of 20th century, and this revolution led to behavioral revolution. Okay. Students, after discussing this whole problem of traditional approach that scholars were dissatisfied with, scholars of IR came up with a solution, and the solution was behavioral approach. Frank Kant is the main proponent of this approach, and this is also known as behavioral revolution in international relations. And Frank Kant was the main proponent of this approach. Scholars were dissatisfied with the traditional or conventional political science approach, and they came up with the solution that it was behavioral approach. They wanted to make political science a pure science actually, and they took behavior as a unit to perform experiments on. Behavior was considered to be a neutral and universally available unit. They claimed that what we can do to prove our theories, they said that okay, we can use behavior. They claimed that all political activity is constituted of human behavior. I mean, who practices politics? It's human. So they say that if we study human behavior, we would be able to prove our theories. We should study human behavior. We should perform some experiments, and we should try to prove that scientifically that what we're saying about human behavior is actually a fact. They said that human behavior can be studied, it can be measured and analyzed empirically, and they started this behavioral revolution then, and they took this behavior as a unit to perform experiments on. Students, this has been widely acclaimed as a great revolution, and this was known as behavioral revolution. And the scholars of IR, they took behavior as a unit to perform experiments on, so that they can compete with all the natural sciences subjects, and they wanted to prevent the sidelining of this political science and international relations. They did not want this political science to be sidelined. Students, behavioralists studied behavior of international actors. They believed that behavior is a neutral and universally available unit, and we can study this unit. I mean, politics is exercised by human, so we can study the behavior of humans. So they started studying behavior. They made this behavior unit of analysis, right? And after studying this behavior, they presented some claims, and here I have enlisted those. So what was the first claim of behavioralist? First of all, students, they claimed that the behavior of international actors, that is states, is objective. What does it mean? Let me explain. Students, behavioralists believed that if we give a condition, a similar condition to all international actors, that is states, if we give a similar condition, they all would have a similar behavior. Their behavior is objective and not subjective. There are no irregularities in behavior of international actors. All would behave similarly if we put them in a condition, similar condition, right? And students, on this theory, on this approach, not theory, on this approach, many scholars built their theory on. For example, Kenneth Waltz. Kenneth Waltz presented his theory of a structural realism, one of the most dominant theories of IR, structural realism. What did he opine? Kenneth Waltz simply claimed that states operate in international anarchic structure. This is the structure. And under this structure, states behave selfishly. All states behave selfishly. And their behavior is regular, similar, their behavior is objective. Because the condition is same, all states operate in international anarchic structure, a similar condition. Their behavior is also similar. Their behavior is objective. Their behavior is selfish due to that structure. So, behavioralists claimed that international actors have an objective behavior. There are regularities in behavior of international actors, and we can study that behavior. Then, generalization on basis of empirical studies. They claimed that by studying, we can generalize the activities of international actors based on empirical studies. Let me explain. This is also very easy to understand. Students, they claimed that we can generalize the behavior of states. For example, again I would give the example of international anarchic structure, Kenneth Waltz. Kenneth Waltz, what did he claim? Kenneth Waltz simply gave a theory, and he said that there is an international anarchic structure, and under this international anarchic structure, states behave selfishly. Now, this was the generalization of the behavior of international actors. He generalized this. He did not say that, okay, we should study this state, we should study the internal structure of a state, and this internal structure of a state influences the behavior of a state. Okay, we should study Afghanistan, we should study USA, we should study the internal structure of Turkey or Scandinavian countries. No, he did not believe in these things, nothing at all. He just generalized. Right? He studied the international anarchic structure. Kenneth Waltz studied the international anarchic structure. He said that there are no supra-sovereign authorities. So the structure is anarchic. And under this anarchic structure, I would generalize the behavior of states, international actors. He said that Pakistan is selfish, USA is selfish, India is selfish, China is selfish, Afghanistan is selfish. Generalization of the behavior of international actors. All these actors are selfish. There is a general behavior. This was the main view of Kenneth Waltz. Then students, use of sophisticated scientific techniques. They say that we can apply scientific techniques such as statistics and anthropology to understand the behavior of international actors. I mean, they claim that we can understand this behavior and we can use statistics and anthropology to understand the behavior of international actors. And then Bull-Kaplan, one of the most important and the main proponents of behavioral approach, he gave his system theory, a very interesting theory. We would study this theory inshallah in the next lecture. He gave 6 models of the international system, and he said that we can study these systems, we can study this based on statistics and anthropology and all these things. They stopped believing in historical knowledge, and they said that we should use sophisticated scientific techniques to build our theory on and to increase the trust of people in our theories. Then another claim, they claimed that IR is a pure science. It is not a social science, it is a pure science. They applied scientific techniques and said that it is a pure science. So these were the main claims of behavioralists. They presented this approach so they can save their theory. They said that today people believe in science, people would stop believing in our theories that are built on historical knowledge, but things did not unfold like this. People did not stop believing in classical realism. In fact, if you study today, you will realize that classical realism is still the most dominant theory of international relations. Anyways, these were the claims of behavioralists, and I hope that I tried my best to explain this. I hope that now it makes sense and all of you understand what were the main claims of behavioralists and what these behavioralists were trying to do. Students, we have studied the claims of behavioralist in detail. Now let's just compare these two approaches, because this was a debate between behavioralist and traditionalist. Let's just compare. Traditional approach was actually based on historical knowledge, the knowledge given by Thucydides, by Niccolo Machiavelli, and Thomas Hobbes. They all believed in the selfish nature of human, and Hans Morgenthau, who was a realist, he also believed in the historical knowledge and the selfish nature of human. Then behavioral approach. Behavioral approach abandoned this historical knowledge, and they believed on scientific methods. Then traditional approach was actually based on normative, the views given by people that could not be proved, and behavioral approach was actually based on empirical data. Empirical data like 2 plus 2 is equals to 4. They believed that we should base our theories on empirical data and not the normatives. Then the conclusions of traditional approach are just speculations. Just making a theory and just thinking, okay, now this is human nature is selfish. It's just a speculation. You cannot prove it scientifically. Then behavioral approach, the conclusions of behavioral approach were actually based on facts and data. Then two most dominant theories of traditional approach, classical realism and classical liberalism. These two theories were actually based on traditional approach. Then behavioral approach, the two most dominant theories of behavioral approach were new realism and new liberalism. Inshallah, we would study these theories in the upcoming lectures. So this was the comparison of behavioral approach and traditional approach. Now students, let's study how the scholars of these two approaches criticized each other. Bull-Kaplan, who was a behavioralist scholar, he criticized traditional approach, and Bull, who was a traditionalist scholar, he criticized behavioralist approach. So this is also known as, don't forget, I just forgot to mention that this debate is also known as Bull-Kaplan debate. People refer to this debate with the name of Bull-Kaplan debate also, because Bull came to rescue traditional approach and Bull-Kaplan came to rescue behavioral approach, and these two scholars criticized the approaches of each other. So let's see what was the critique of Bull-Kaplan. Students, Bull-Kaplan first of all claimed that normative and subjective approach, your approach is, traditional approach is a normative and subjective approach to international relations on which not everyone can believe. For example, if I say that human nature is selfish, some would believe and some would not believe with me. Some would disagree with me. This is not established fact. You cannot prove it scientifically. This is just a normative and subjective approach. So this was the main criticism of Bull-Kaplan. Then he said that no sense of rigor and academic framework offered by traditionalists to study international relations. He opined that you do not give any academic framework. You just come up with assumptions. What kind of assumptions? That human nature is selfish. States are selfish. Human nature is driven by glory, diffidence, and we are in a state of war of all against all. This is your theory based on assumptions, no academic framework. Then shift of approach is needed to gain the trust and draw the attention of policymakers and students. This was the main problem, and this was the main threat, according to behavioralists, to the theories of IR. They argued that there should be a shift of approach, and this shift of approach is needed because people believe in science. People have started believing in science. We are living in an era of science. Science is on its rise, and you are just depending on historical knowledge. So if we want students and policymakers to believe in our theories, and if we want to draw their attention to our theories, there is a need of shift of approach. We should shift our approach. We should shift from traditional historical knowledge to scientific data and statistical model and scientific model, right? So they criticized traditional approach by saying that there is a need of shift of approach. Then they said that what you do only speculation and no test of facts and data through scientific models. So this was the whole criticism of Martin Kaplan on traditional approach. Then students Hadley Bull came to the rescue of traditional approach. He was a traditionalist scholar and he criticized behavioralist approach. What did he say? He said that history, philosophy, subjective behavior of a statesman, all these things are ignored by behavioralists. He said that, I mean, if we study, we would realize that history is also valuable. History also has great influence not only on mind of people, but on an entire nation. Philosophy, subjective behavior of a statesman, all these things have great influence on how states work. I mean, today if we study our history, I mean, every state, if it's study its history, we would realize that history has a great influence. I cannot, I do not want to actually quote any example of any particular state here because I do not want to hurt anybody's sentiments. I do not want to trigger a conflict. I do not want to do this here, but you all are adults and you can understand what I'm trying to say, that if we study history of any nation, we would realize that the history has an impact. History definitely has an impact. Philosophy has an impact, and subjective behavior of a statesman also has an impact. I mean, if there is a leader of a state, he would try to make decisions according to his understanding. So his behavior, his subjectivity definitely will have an impact on how the state works. We cannot ignore this. We cannot say that, okay, state's behavior is objective. Everyone would behave in a similar way. No, we cannot do this. This was the main criticism of traditionalist on behavioralist approach. Then they claimed that behavioral approach cannot study all the nuances of international relations through scientific methods. For example, rise of non-state actors and terrorism. I mean, we cannot apply scientific methods on these things. There are innumerable nuances in international relations. I mean, international relations is simply the study of world in transition. And we are living in a world in transition where things are changing with each day. So we cannot study this through scientific methods. I mean, yesterday there were no non-state actors. There were just state actors and nations. But today there are innumerable non-state actors. And we cannot do this by the help of scientific methods. So they claim that the nuances of international relations cannot be studied through scientific methods. Then they claimed that facts in international relations require interpretation and intuition. They said that yes, there are facts in international relations, but they require interpretation and intuition. For example, war is a fact, peace is a fact, but we need to interpret war. Why war happens, why people wage war, we need to interpret that, and we cannot resolve that problem by the help of using scientific methods. And how Thucydides interpreted war, he claimed that war, the human nature, selfish human nature wages war. And how liberalists interpret war, they claimed that unrepresentative rulers, they wage war. So this was the interpretation of traditionalist scholars, and they claimed that these facts need interpretation and not the scientific methods. Then they said that there are also irregularities in the behavior of international actors. What was the main claim of behavioralist? They claimed that international actors behave in a regular way. if we give them a system, a similar system, their behavior would be regular. There would be regularities in their behavior, and we can study that behavior. But here, traditional scholars are criticizing behavioralists for their claim, for this claim of regularities. They're saying that no, the behavior of international actors is not regular, it is irregular, and we must study these irregularities also. Then they said that scientific methods cannot be applied on the reality always. We cannot apply these scientific methods. Reality changes because this reality of the world, international relations, the realities of international relations depends on human. Who performs, who practices politics? It's the human. And humans are subjective. The belief and the views of one person would vary from the beliefs and views of another person. For example, the view of Hitler was different and the view of Woodrow Wilson was different. Their behavior was subjective. They did not behave similarly. This was the main claim of traditional scholars. So this was the criticism of behavioralist approach by traditionalist scholars. I hope that all whatever I have explained here makes sense now. So we are done with second grade debate of IR. This was a debate between traditional approach and the behavioralist approach. Behavioralists were saying just introduce scientific methods, just use scientific method and abandon using this traditional approach, the historical knowledge. But traditionalists were saying that no, we cannot do this. This historical knowledge also has its value. It is important. It has an impact on the way nations work. This was the main claim. I hope that everything that I've explained here makes sense, and now second grade debate is very clear, and all of you can definitely revise whatever I have explained here. This is the end of this lecture. Thank you so much for listening to me, and don't forget to subscribe the channel and like the video. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz.